Hello, hello. So you've seen that I'm clearly not there. It's just my voice and this globe behind me. Um, in all actuality, I'm actually just sitting in the teacher lounge doing absolutely nothing right now, but I thought we could do it virtual. No, I'm out of town today. Sorry, I'm helping my grandfather, so I do apologize. But we're still going to go forward with the lesson plan as planned because we don't have that many days and we have to get through this. This is my wife, Raquel. This is our castle in Scotland, and this is our little area. I thought that'd be cool to show. But anyways, we're going to get this going. We're going to take some notes today, and we're going to do a worksheet. It shouldn't be too difficult, but just stay with me, and I'll do my best to work through it. This is the worksheet that you've been given as well by our wonderful substitute teacher today, who I have no clue who it is. It's a GDP flow chart, so we're going to need this for the second part of the lesson plan. But for the first part, we're going to get going with the notes. We'll take that, and let's get this going for us. Okay, so I'll give you a few minutes right now to write down what you need to. These are the table of contents that we're going to use. So today we will be on number 98. We're going to do the chapter 15 vocab. Page 99, we're going to do a lesson on GDP, and then page 100 is going to be the GDP worksheet. So I'll give you a few seconds to write that down, please, in your table of contents. And I'm going to do my best to make sure I stay slow, everything, but if you need to, just ask the substitute teacher to press pause on it. But I think I'm going to give enough time, so we should be okay. Hopefully. Okay, let's get moving. So this is going to be our chapter 15 vocab. Reminder quiz is Thursday because you do not have this class on Wednesday, but still it's going to be your last quiz in econ ever on Thursday. Chapter 15 vocab. Okay, we will get moving with the notes now. So we're going to go out of order. We're going to spend a day on GDP, then we'll move into fiscal policy. This is just a one-day lesson on GDP. And I don't know who that is, but he looks like someone famous, so I thought it was funny. We're going to talk about GDP, which is also known as gross domestic product. So let's get going. What I would recommend, actually what I'm going to ask of you, is only to write down the stuff that is in red. The other stuff is just for you to know, for us to talk about. So when you see the red on the screen, just write that for your notes. So the first one is, what the heck is GDP? What is its definition? We know GDP, or gross domestic product, is known as the market value of all final goods and services produced in a country in a given time period. So when we think about like report cards, grades, everything like that, this is one of our big indicators for a country, no matter if it's the United States or anyone else, but it's your GDP. What your GDP says, it's the way of looking at your financial health, see how things are going, and helping to project figures for the future. I know we like to think economists just make things up, but they actually use numbers through GDP metrics like that in order to make predictions for the future. But it's important to remember that it's for a given time period what they look for. So just like we would look at inflation rates, GDP changes as well. So, and we know that this definition has 4 parts, and we're going to explore those. 1 is market value, 2 is the final goods and services, 3, it has to be produced within a country and in a given time period. But again, just write down the GDP defined in the red for me, please. And thank you for Adrian Toyota for showing up to class today. That's really good, and I'm thankful you're here. Thank you. Okay, so gross domestic product, the first one we're talking about as part of it is market value. So we got to write market value down, but blue is kind of the definition about it. So write it however you want. If you want to write the full thing, go ahead. If not, you can paraphrase. But GDP is a market value. Goods and services are valued at their market prices. So we know that goods and services will fluctuate up and down with time. GDP tries to measure, excuse me, that shift all the time. So it tries to give us an accurate snapshot of the market in a time, as we know prices change. And I wasn't too thrilled with my example that I gave about adding apples and oranges, computers and popcorn. So we're just going to skip that because I don't like it. So number 2, final goods and services. And GDP is the value of the final goods and services produced. A final good or service is an item bought by its final user during a specified time period. So we're going to explore more in the worksheet about that in terms of what a final user is, but it's the person that at the end is going to consume whatever, being the good or the service. And since I did this out of order, we'll talk about intermediate goods on Tuesday or Thursday. So just skip that right now, but just know what a final good is and how it relates to GDP. So that's that one. So our next 2, we said there were 4 parts to gross domestic product. The third is it has to be produced within a country. So GDP measures production within a country, or domestic production. And then the fourth one is in a given time period. GDP measures production during a specific time period, normally a year or a quarter of a year. And by a quarter of a year, we mean divide 12 by 4. That's a quarter. So every 3 months, a quarter system comes out. That's when you'll see a lot of GDP numbers come out. The quarter numbers often help us predict moving forward, but we tend to look at the year figure as being more helpful. Okay, we'll move forward. Again, GDP and the circular flow of expenditure and income. Yes, don't write that down. Just please do write down that GDP measures the value of production, which also equals the total expenditure on final goods and total income. I'm sorry. So if we know a lot about business, we know balance sheets, income statements, about balancing out expenditures and income. That's really what GDP is trying to do. But it's the best way possible that economists have figured out how to measure the value of production. We want to know, is what we're doing really working? Is it really productive? Is it really helping us grow at a rate that we need to? That's really what GDP helps do that. And below it, don't write it, but the equality of income and output shows the link between productivity and living standards. So just like we have inflation, we look at that, we have the misery index, we have those things. GDP helps us bridge this gap between what we're producing in productivity as a nation and what our living standards are. So usually when GDP is higher, living standards are higher. When GDP is at a lower percent, living standards are usually lower. Okay, and you're going to hear these 2 definitions. You'll hear nominal GDP versus real. All you need to remember is that nominal GDP is measured in the current dollar today, where real GDP is adjusted for inflation. So it's just a way to help us look at GDP throughout the past and how it's related. We tend to use real GDP more than nominal, but it's important to know that there are 2 different GDPs. So nominal and real. Okay. GDP versus GNP. It's important to know that the GDP just deals with the factors of production within a country. Specifically, where GNP is the factors of production owned by a country's citizens, regardless of where their output is produced. So if I move my talents to, oh my goodness, I don't even know, the Cayman Islands, and I'm producing something, I would not be counted in the US's GDP, but I could be counted my production in the GNP, as I'm still a citizen of the US. So that's just important to remember on the global scale of things. You will rarely hear of a GNP number. You're going to hear primarily GDP, but it's important for us to see the difference and just know it. That's it. Yes, calculation. I knew this one was coming. Excellent. Don't write any of this down because this is going to be on the worksheet, but I just need to go over it. The equation down there is what you're going to see in terms of how we calculate GDP. So I'm sure many of you are asking, like, how do you do that? There is a method to it. We're going to do that on the worksheet. So I just wanted to show that quickly. So do not write this down. Excellent. Okay, now it's time to get out that worksheet that we have in front of us. You should see this matching what you see on my screen here should match yours. My suggestion would be there's going to be 6 or 7 different things. Excuse me, man, I got the cough like crazy. You should have a different color, or maybe you can do a dotted line versus a full line, just something, because we're going to go through a few different flows. What you'll see here are the entities, so households, firms, rest of the world, and governments. It literally means what it says. When we mean firms, we probably mean businesses, things like that is what we're talking about. And in the middle here, you'll see one that says factor markets, goods market, and financial markets. So we're going to explain this as we go through, but just add them on. So we want to see this in a circular flow diagram in order for gross domestic product to make sense. So this diagram is going to show us the transactions among households, firms, governments, and the rest of the world. So let's get started with this. We know that these transactions take place in factor markets, good markets, and financial markets. Hence, we have all three there in the middle, the little cylinders. So one, the firms, the Y, firms hire factors of production from households. The blue flow, which is this blue line here, arrow, also known as Y, shows total income paid by firms to households. So to put that in plain English, when firms hire factors of production from households, this is like your labor, the factor market. So they're hiring the individual's talents to produce something. So this is what Y is. So I'd like you to follow just like the blue line made itself right there. Draw the line from firms through factor markets up to households, and make sure you label it Y. And so that's what I'm going to ask you to do for everything here. When you see the line being drawn, draw it as well. Just listen to me, but you just need to label it. Okay, next one is we have the line C go from households through good markets and into firms. And C says that households buy consumer goods and services. The red flow, which is known as C, shows consumption expenditures. And by expenditures, we mean spending. So households are going to buy stuff. I'm going to go to Walmart to buy my stuff. And that's what C shows. So it's important to start it. It can't start the other way. It needs to start from households, go through good markets, and into firms. Okay, next one. So we saw 2 other lines now. We saw S and T come, so we have S go all the way from households through financial markets back around to firms. And that's savings, household savings. And then we saw one line T go from households over to governments. And this one says that firms borrow some of what households save to finance their investments. So we know that how do I say that correctly? Let me think for a second. Okay, so when we put our money into savings accounts sometimes, hence financial markets, or we set aside money, those institutions are going to lend out to firms to invest. And sadly, T, you do have to pay taxes. If you don't, well, you'll be in jail eventually. You may not be in jail initially, but you will eventually. Tax evasion is a big deal after 5 to 10 years. Just ask 50 Cent and other people. But I think that makes sense, yeah. Okay, so we're good with that one. So again, we have S and T. S only goes through financial markets. So let's go to this next one. Okay, so we saw the line start from firms, and this is I, and it goes all the way around through goods markets and comes back into firms. So what this says is that firms buy capital goods from other firms. The red flow I represents this investment expenditure by firms. So by firms, we mean companies again, are going to buy things from other companies in order to... Yes, that's correct. Sorry, this second I can be confusing when you're trying to explain it, but I think it makes sense. Firms need to buy other firms' goods and services in order to invest back in their own. Yep, that makes sense. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. And this is G. So if we'll notice G, we saw a red line come from G that went from governments through good markets and into firms. And we also saw a line that goes both ways. The arrow goes both governments and financial markets because it's representing repayment or borrowing. So G, we know governments buy goods and services, hence the G, and borrow or repay debt if spending exceeds or is less than taxes. Okay, and we've learned through the Federal Reserve that we have to make things in order to repay. We take out loans, we pay off debt, we do all that. But governments, we do buy goods and services as a government entity. All the government contractors, the government doesn't make these things. They buy them from everyone. And the biggest example I can use is the military. The military buys all of their stuff, usually from private companies. And even if it's subsidized, it's still a private company that they're buying through. Hence, the government's buying goods and services, where that one comes through there. Okay, so we should move to the next one. Okay, this is X and M. So X minus M is what we're looking at. So this is where the rest of the world comes into play. We're going to see an arrow go from rest of the world up through goods markets, and then we're going to see that same arrow come back through into firms. We're also going to see the same two-way arrow go from rest of the world to the financial markets and back, because this is foreign borrowing and lending. So we know that the rest of the world buys goods and services from us in the US, we know that. Hence the X, and sells us goods and services. M, so minus the net exports, are X minus M. It's pretty easy when you understand it like that, that we export as a nation, so other nations have to buy our stuff, but we also import things. So we import goods and services. All you have to do is go down to the Port of Long Beach and you can see how much stuff we import and export every day. But what we're going to do in the equation is we're going to minus our X from our M, our net exports. We'll make sure that line goes from rest of the world through the good markets and then down through firms. Okay, and the rest of the world borrows from us or lends to us depending on whether net exports are positive or negative. So that's a big one in that one. If we're exporting more than we're importing, we're probably going to get more lending. We're going to be able to borrow because we have financials to back it up. Or if we're usually importing more than we're exporting, it means we're not producing as much and we're buying more. Our lending and our purchasing power from banks around the world is going to go down. So it's important in the GDP, the X minus M, for that to make sense. Okay, I'm not sure why I put that slide in because we already have the blue and red flows. We know that. Are the circular flow of expenditures and income? Yes, we know that. The green flows are borrowing and lending. They're kind of not really green, so I just call them the two-sided arrows. Okay, so in GDP, if we were to look at how we colored these things, the sum of the red flows needs to equal the blue flows. And I always, although it's not applicable, I always think export, import. Yes, we always want to have slightly more in exports so we can be making money. We can't have it the other way, but we always want to be equal in general in terms of our income, and everything needs to balance out. So the GDP, in a very confusing fashion, like I've just explained for the last 21 minutes and 37 seconds, the point is it has to balance. And that's what its goal is. It tries to balance our market and our system for us through all these different avenues. And it confuses us while we do it. That's the main thing to remember. But with this equation, you can figure it out and it makes sense. You just have to think of these things as real entities. And that is how you get Y is also known as GDP. So Y equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M. That's the equation. And it should be written in the top right of your worksheet, you'll notice. And this is what we all waited to see. The end. Woo! Yes. That was awesome. And in case you don't know, that's 50 Cent, and that's Mayweather Money Train. And I don't know what this is. Apparently it's something cool, but it looked funny, so I put it in there. Why not? Okay, so that concludes notes. Good job on staying it, and concludes your worksheet. Good job on doing it. If you have any questions, you can ask me on Tuesday when I come back, but that should be it. And now moving forward, I've instructed the wonderful substitute teacher to abide by this embedded support policy. If your last name is there, you need to stay. And I notice NB means notebook and CP means career project. If your name has a CP with the parenthesis paper, all that means is you have turned in your online Google Classroom, and we just need your paper of the step 1 and 2, that grid, and then the thing written on the back. If it has CP, it either means you're missing both of them entirely, or you're just missing the Google Classroom. So, with that said, if your name is not on this list, you have a lot of time to leave. You probably have about 15 minutes to 20 minutes. So good job on your part. Thank you. The rest of us, though, let's make sure we get these in quickly so we can get our grades up, because we all want to have grades because we are all giant rock stars and we need to show it. So that's all I have for you today, and I appreciate you paying attention and listening to this. Good job, and have a wonderful rest of the day. And I will see you Tuesday morning, bright and early, ready to go. So thank you again, guys. Have a wonderful day. Be safe.